All right, college football playoff time. Carson Fox with you here, Fox on West Virginia Sports. And yes, I have friends. One of my good friends here, Sean Saputo, knows college football as good as anyone I know alive. Sean, thanks for joining. Glad you had this idea. Um, Wearing my Arizona State shirt to represent for another team I'm kind of casual for. I know first and foremost, always bleed old gold and blue. But since my brother went there, representing, I guess, the Big 12 conference of which West Virginia is a part of. Want to talk about how I feel like they were kind of a team that splashed the party themselves with Boise State, with Clemson, who's stealing an automatic bid. I think that's probably a place that we can start first, Sean, is I think that this was the year as part of a 12 team conference that whenever you're talking about these teams that were off the bubble, Alabama, Old Miss, BYU, a team that's not even really being talked about all that much here, Miami, that there were three teams, well, I guess two teams really, who stole bids, one being a Boise State team, one being a Notre Dame team that's not a part of the conference, and then Arizona State getting in. There was a lot of controversy in the media about where would they be seated in comparison to Boise State. I have them ranked third, and we can go through one by one with each team. But where would you say are you fell on as it came to that, Sean, of like teams that didn't necessarily get into the field? Do you think this is the right number of teams, respective to what should be college football's like best postseason type of script and schedule? How do you feel about the way things have shaken out with that?
I really think the 12 teams can work. I think there's tweaking that needs to be done based on what we saw in this initial run with it in terms of how the committee's going to decide who's in, who's out. To preface off your first question, though, I don't see Boise State as a bid stealer just because the G5 has that chance if they are ranked within the top of the conference champions. And Boise State, with the lone loss being to Oregon by 3 points this year, I think they were vastly deserving of being in the tournament coming up. I think the bid stealers, Arizona State. I mean, the turnaround 3-9 to 10-2, fantastic job by Arizona State to turn things around. The Big 12 didn't get a lot of love because there was just, and I'll say this. I know you're a Big 12 guy. I know you're a West Virginia fan, but there was just so much mediocrity after the top few teams. You had Iowa State, you had BYU, you had Arizona State, but then you had your teams like Kansas State who fell off a cliff and went 8-4. You had a Kansas team that was supposed to be a projected 8-9 win team that wins 5 games this year. There was Oklahoma State, another team a lot of people thought was going to be a 10-win team. They go 3-9. So the Big 12 got hurt by the mediocrity that came after the four teams that were up top, considering three of them had only won 7 or fewer games last year.
Yep.
So Arizona State is a bid stealer. Clemson, of course, a bid stealer. They got help in the last week of the season with Miami losing to Syracuse. So that puts them in the fold. That gave them the opportunity to steal a bid. Notre Dame is the one thing that's going to irritate me for the rest of time. The fact that they can just be handed a playoff spot by playing a de facto Big Ten schedule against the mediocrity of the Big Ten. While I do agree, though, that they are not allowed to get a bye. I think that is a great rule that was established for Notre Dame. However, it's going to turn into this thing year in and year out where I just see Notre Dame constantly hosting and hosting and hosting. And they don't have to go out and do anything. They can play their mediocrity of a schedule against the Big Ten and what formerly was the Pac 12. They can play that schedule, play their MAC teams that they lost to, by the way, which is why I'm very happy with where they ended up. I'm not happy with the draw they got, though. But I think really Arizona State and Clemson are the only two. But I think Arizona State by the end of the year was way deserving of a shot.
Well, I want to follow up on what you said about Notre Dame because looking at their full breadth of schedule, they had the week 1 win, which is a ranked win over Texas A&M on the road.
Which ends up unranked by the end.
I know, and this is kind of where I want to segue with this is you had Louisville, who was ranked 15th at that point. You had Navy, who was 24th, and they had Army, who is a conference champion. That was Army's only loss. So three of those wins. Well, I don't know what Texas A&M is ranked now
They're
at the
not.
off my head, but there you go. And this is what, like, debating this with one of our other friend. Hey, Doug, if you're tuning into this, um, the difference of what I feel like is so difficult to talk about because you got case in points like SMU losing to BYU when SMU wasn't ranked. It's do you does it mean more to beat a ranked opponent when that opponent was ranked, or you have an example like Pitt, SMU beating Pitt? I thought that was a huge win given the gravity of the situation for SMU at that point in time, but that doesn't count as a ranked win. Technically, Oregon's win over Boise State is not a ranked win. In the case in point of let me see who's another one. Miami does not have any ranked wins. Neither does Indiana. So is it whenever you play that opponent, if then they stay ranked for the rest of the season, or is it where everybody finishes at the end of the season? I get like the counter argument being, say, does that win for Georgia Tech mean anything week one beating a ranked Florida State team? But I think like you have a case in point like the SMU versus Pitt argument. That game, that was a 7-0 Pitt team who was one of the hottest teams in the country with SMU, big time Saturday matchup. But now after Pitt goes 0-5 to finish off the season, that you're not going to count that as a ranked win. So how do you feel that argument versus strength of schedule? What coinciding when the SEC only plays 8 conference games?
Yeah.
And you did have some teams like Alabama who didn't get in, who did challenge themselves with an on the road game against Wisconsin. They did play a pretty good G5 program in South Florida. But then you got an Ole Miss who doesn't challenge themselves in the non-conference. But then you got to also, I feel like, reward Texas for going on the road to the big house and stomping Michigan, even though, that's not again, that was a ranked win at the time, but because Michigan finishes 7-5, I just think that there's so much imbalance to scheduling these days, coinciding with what topic I feel like we can talk next is the disparity in talent between the conferences. Top to bottom, you have some top heavy conferences where you have some other conferences who are very competitive with each other within league, but then they don't challenge themselves in the non-conference. So this was just such an odd year when also you consider the Boise State and the Notre Dame stealing the bids, in my opinion.
Yeah, because now, like you said, we've reached a point with now they're looking at current top 25 wins as compared to what your body of work was during the regular season. So, as you said, Oregon technically did not beat a ranked Boise State team, but now they have a current top 25 ranked win under their belt. So, that's where I see such an issue with it is because you could have a team, and I'm going to use the example. I know you're the West Virginia guy, I'm the Pitt guy. But Pitt was undefeated at 7-0 when they played SMU, as you alluded to. Pitt got derailed with injuries to Eli Holstein, Des Reed. The offensive line was in complete shambles. Defensive players got hurt. They lost so much to injury that the whole season turned on the Pitt Panthers. So, how can you hold a win against Pitt that was ranked 18th and undefeated at the time against SMU because they ended the season 7-5? You can't, in my opinion, you can't hold what happens after against what happens in the now, because injuries happen. A team can get a serious injury. Like, in Alabama could lose a Jalen Hurts and go to a true freshman quarterback, and they could lose 4 or 5 games. Well, so now that changes the trajectory of certain wins because, well, Alabama was ranked sixth, but because Tennessee beat them when they were ranked sixth and they had their full body, but now they've lost 5 games because, Milrose out. Why should that affect Tennessee? It
Mm-hmm.
should. So they
Yeah.
need to establish what's going to matter, and the scheduling. It's never going to be right because what I have come to grasp with is the ACC and the Big 12 have the most minimal margin of error to go about as compared to the SEC and the Big 10. So
100%.
while the SEC and Big Ten can go out like Bama and schedule a USF, a Western Kentucky, a Mercer in week 13, they can get away with it because when the polls come out, the majority of the poll is going to be taken up by SEC and Big Ten teams. Whereas the ACC and the Big 12 are going to have to schedule these games against tougher opponents to get the opportunity to have their schedule match the SEC and the Big.
Correct. Correct. That's why I always got on Neil Brown's case for wanting to say, like, we shouldn't be playing Penn State. We shouldn't be playing Pitt. Why am I having 11 Power 5 or Power 4 opponents to my schedule? It's because, yes, exactly.
They have
ACC
to.
and Big 12 have to have that. Just like Cincinnati years ago in 2021 when they got in, it's because they beat a Wisconsin and they beat a Notre Dame in the same season. They had to have that. So I guess what that then means to me is let's go on the point of like, yeah, the strength of schedule and all that. Do conference championship games matter anymore? Because I'm reading an article this morning by David Ubben of The Athletic, who's basically just saying, like, why did Texas and why did Georgia even play that game? Because now Alabama's play is not in. I think that the committee did reward SMU, justly so. Even though, like, to the conversation we're having here, now that Louisville's not ranked, now that Pitt's not ranked, SMU technically doesn't have a ranked win from the end of the season.
Yeah.
So I think for a team like Clemson, hell yeah, you want to have a conference championship game. That got you in.
Yeah.
SMU, fine, fine. That was a prove it moment for them if they would have won that. But that's good for the ACC now that two teams have got in. So an SEC team or two ACC teams are in,
Yep.
one Big 12, one Mountain West, one independent in Notre Dame. Yeah, they should have to join a conference. Should. And I think that will be the next iteration of the Super League that I can feel like is coming, or more conference realignment to get these conferences to a more equally playing field, unlike what Lane Kiffin said on Friday at Ole Miss of just how much better that the SEC is than everybody else out there. So I've kind of thought that the conference championship games are just a money grab for the conferences. I mean, the SEC is going to pull in 8 figures from that game yesterday between Georgia and Texas. And while it didn't hurt Texas, it hurt the rest of the conference. No Ole Miss, no Alabama. I don't think either of them deserve to be in. And then for the Big 12, to your point, what you said, there wasn't really some heavy hitter at the very top because BYU, I mean, I think BYU could have been the one team that would make a case. But again, Clemson stole that extra bid by the ACC. You got Boise State, who I would take over a BYU. I wouldn't take BYU over Arizona State's resume.
No.
But I would take them over BYU's without being in that conference championship game. So it's kind of like conference championship games matter,
Yeah.
but they don't if dependent upon, like, it's dependent upon the situation. So I'm just glad that Georgia and Texas had fun and played hard, gave everybody a show that went into overtime, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
really didn't matter at the end of the day.
Well, there's two ways to fix this. One
Okay.
would be with how many teams are within the conferences now, do away with non-conference games. Just play all games within your conference. You can
Oh,
have
I'd
enough
hate that.
teams to where
I'd
you
hate
can.
that. I would hate
You
that so
hate it,
much.
but now you have a complete justification on who's where because because now when it boils down to it, it's what you did within your conference. Why do you have to try to find this, differentiation with, okay, well, Bama played Mercer, but SMU played TCU. You're comparing a Power Five team, a Power Four team playing another Power Four team, but you're also comparing another Power Four team playing an FCS school. So if you could do that, do you want to? No, because it doesn't help the smaller schools. They get paydays by playing these teams, so you don't want
Mhm.
to do away with it, but it's an option. As for the conference championship games, though, I think realistically the committee saved conference championship games with the selection of SMU over Alabama. And I
Right.
texted this to you earlier, and this is one of my biggest fears coming out of this whole thing is the sheer fact that if they would take Alabama over an SMU, you are basically saying, well, you had to play an extra game. You lost this extra game. And because you lost this extra game, you are now being punished as compared to an Alabama who got to sit down and do nothing for a week and is getting an extra week of rest. And
Mm.
they get in because you lost. And that point, now you're going to start to think, okay, are there teams that are going to start to sit out these conference championship games? Because
Right.
if that happens to SMU and they don't get in after a 3-point loss to Clemson and their only other loss of the year is a 3-point loss to a ranked BYU team now,
Mhm. Mhm.
you're saying that that conference championship game will hurt you more than if you don't play. So why would a team that's in the future in the area where SMU was going in, why would they take the risk?
Yeah.
Why would you even risk going out and playing? I would say no thanks. Give it to the third place team because we're set if we don't touch the field. I don't
Yeah.
make
I
up
get
having COVID or something at that point.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I'm telling you on where I think the SEC moves now from here with this is because like they're going to have to figure out something of do they make this is what was the article I referenced that David Ubben wrote
Yeah.
of making their conference championship game like essentially a third place game
Yeah.
because they want to get that person another, resume item, bullet point, get them on to get at least 3 teams guaranteed because they're not going to settle for this. They're not going to settle for just Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. They want half the field. They want half the field to be SEC teams, and
We
they're going to
talked
justify that.
we've talked about this.
Yeah,
What the committee really wants more than anything is a de facto Big Ten SEC challenge right now.
truly. And if you're Alabama, be mad at Notre Dame. Be
Yeah,
mad at the fact that Ashton Genty is on Boise State.
yeah,
Imagine if Army didn't lose to Notre Dame, or like you could switch Army out. Technically, I feel like they're a conference champion for Notre Dame. You could have got two. You could have got an Army and a
yeah.
Boise State, or yeah, Boise State into this field if those two teams were both undefeated. So I think like yeah, the SEC is not going to stand for this. They're gonna. I mean, they tried this past year with the Big Ten to negotiate some sort of they were put drew their line in the sand that they were going to try and break away and create their own kind of super league, super playoff. But instead, they're going to have to be stuck with this for at least a few more seasons while they try and bleed the Big 12 and the ACC dry, from a financial standpoint because they're getting paid so much more. But yeah, and Ole Miss being out of the field and Alabama being out of the field, even so far as like a team like Missouri, who doesn't have the resume, but they're going to say if they have the roster, or Texas A&M has the roster, or I know it was a rough year, really rough year for a team like Florida because of their schedule, but they're one of the hottest teams in the country. I do think that is what yeah we've talked about this offline. The next iteration of college football being is that, but I actually do think, and this is where I think it could be a good segue, we got the teams right. The
Yeah.
College Football Playoff Committee got the teams that should be in it right. Now, you and I have differences on seeding, and I
Yeah.
think that's where we can start with this conversation. But at least from the teams all into the field that should be in it for this case, yes, you can make your arguments for Alabama. Yes, Ole Miss. Yes, even BYU, I think to some standpoint, Miami. But those four out,
Yep.
the 12 in. How are you feeling about those 12 teams and where they're seated?
So actually, I last night texted my group message with friends of ours from college, and I initially got the exact seating right. I had Oregon 1, Georgia 2, Boise 3, and Arizona State 4. I had Texas 5, Penn State 6, Notre Dame 7, Ohio State 8, Tennessee 9, Indiana 10. I originally had SMU at 11 and Clemson at 12. But when I put my tweet out, the more I thought about it, I thought you could flip flop SMU and Clemson, give Clemson the little bit of an edge with the head to head victory in the conference championship. So I
Mhm.
flipped it to Clemson 11, SMU 12. But initially, I actually had exactly how the seeding came about. So I'll start by this. I am happy with how the seeding went, but there is a lot that needs changed based on how this seeding is going about and how this tournament's being run that I see needing to be changed in the future.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that, or you want
Yeah.
to talk about?
So, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording here. So it's the way this tournament is currently constructed is really a stupid system. You have an Oregon Duck team that is the lone undefeated team in the country. No other team did what Oregon did this year, and
Who,
they
if the
won.
season ended right now, are
Yeah,
deserving of a national championship?
yes, undefeated, no blemish, beat Ohio State, beat Penn State, beat everybody in their path. Well, guess what? As the undefeated Big Ten champion, the lone undefeated in the country, they now have to face Ohio State or Tennessee. On the other hand, Penn State loses. Penn State's best win of the season is Illinois. They had two cracks at really bolstering that resume by beating Ohio State at home,
Yep.
beating Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. They lose both those games. They are now rewarded with a path that they play SMU in Happy Valley, and if they win, they play Boise State.
Yep.
How are we? So when you look at the system the way it is now, you are rewarding Penn State based on how this bracket is panned out. You're rewarding Penn State for losing its two toughest games, losing in the Big Ten championship game, and you have Oregon now sitting here going, great, we got to play either Ohio State or Tennessee. Cool,
Yeah.
we get a week off. They have to plw.
Yeah.
But
Ooh.
then the chances are you're probably playing Texas after that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So how did Oregon win in this situation? They
Yeah, they
did.
did.
So
They
the
did.
change that needs to be made for the future of this tournament is after the first round, they need to reseed the tournament. You keep the top four with the four conference champions, and you reseed 5, 6, 7, and 8 based on the winners. So if you have a term where it's no, granted, if all the top teams and all the hosts win, then it is what it is in that standpoint. You just go based off that. You can't reseed based on margin of victory, things like that.
Mhm.
But if you
Mhm.
have an instance where you say Clemson with Cade Klubnik, who is playing out of his mind right now,
Yep. Yep.
say they upset Texas,
Yep.
you have Clemson, a 12 seed, getting past. Say Indiana figures out their mistakes from Ohio State and they go in and beat Notre Dame. So now, and then you have Penn State and Ohio State win. Why is Arizona State playing a 12 seed? Why is then Georgia playing the 10 seed while Oregon is playing the 8 seed? This is where you need to change things up and reseed because, okay, well, now we need to get Oregon versus Clemson because they're the lowest remaining seed. Georgia should get Indiana. Boise State should get Ohio State. And Arizona State should get Penn State. They have to reseed this because it makes no sense that Oregon has to go through this path. It makes no sense that Georgia might have to play Notre Dame in the second round and then probably Penn State, whereas Penn State has the best route of any team in this tournament.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too.
So that's the change
Yeah.
that needs to be made. They have to reseed this thing.
Yeah. I think that's messy.
Yeah.
But I think you're right around if you want to make it as fair as humanly possible. But there's so
Because
much
what are you getting
subjectivity.
rewarded? What are you getting rewarded if you're Oregon outside of you get a bye? Because this is another thing about this tournament too. These wild card teams, this Ohio State, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Indiana.
Mhm.
I'm trying to see who else on here. Those teams, they get an extra week off already. So now you got a team like Penn State and Texas who lose their conference championship game, already have to play a 13th game.
Yep.
They're getting one fewer week off than well, not them technically, but in a
I
way,
wonder. That's a
they're
great point. That's a great point. I wonder if that's why they did it. If that's why they seeded where they seeded, because if you don't want to technically give an advantage to a team
yeah,
who didn't play a conference championship game in the case of
yeah.
your Indiana and your Notre Dame, I think that makes for a pretty intriguing in-state 7-10 matchup.
Because if they put Bama in over SMU,
Yeah.
Bama got off this Saturday, they would be off next Saturday, and then
Yep.
they would play. Whereas Texas played this Saturday, would get the week, but then they play again. So you
Yep.
could be having a team with 2 weeks off playing against the team that just played a physical game in a championship.
Yeah, I think that's why they did that, having those teams that had off
Yep.
against each other versus having to play a conference championship game.
Mm-hmm.
Texas at 5, I don't have a problem with it, but it just goes back to our debate of ranked wins at the time versus
Yeah.
ranked at the end of the season. Because if Texas A&M isn't ranked either, then Texas didn't have a ranked win this season, but they did beat number 10 at the time, Michigan, number 18 at the time, Oklahoma, 25 at the time, Vanderbilt, and then 15 at the time, Texas A&M. Got to the conference championship game, went to overtime, went toe-to-toe twice with Georgia, fell through. I think I'm fine with them at 5. At 6 being Penn State, maybe.
I
Again,
I think it's
yeah,
fair.
yeah, because then if you drop them to 7 against Notre Dame's not a conference champion, did have the loss to Miami of Ohio. Wasn't it who they
Northern
lost?
Illinois.
Ball State? Northern Illinois. Yeah, sorry,
Northern
another
Illinois.
MAC team there. So I think you got to give the edge to Penn State, even though
Yes.
their resume, if you want to argue the wins that Notre Dame has versus Penn State's ranked wins, Notre Dame has Texas A&M, Louisville, and both the um, service schools. So,
Well, and I agree with it because Texas and Penn State should not be punished for losing close games in a conference championship.
yeah. And
I
then
think
I
they need
love
that.
that matchup of Tennessee, Ohio State. I
The
think
only
that'll be a fun one.
The only thing I think that should have happened there is I think they should have flip flopped. I think Tennessee should be the host in that game. I projected it Ohio State
Oh,
8 and Tennessee 9. I understand Ohio State's loss to Oregon was by 1 point on the
hmm
road, but
hmm
then they went out and laid a flat out egg at home against Michigan, who was a 6-5 team, and they were 21-point favorites. Tennessee's bad loss came week 5 against Arkansas. And Arkansas was a solid team at that point in time before injuries kind of riddled them a little bit.
Yep.
I think that loss to Arkansas is vastly better than a loss to a Michigan team as a 21-point favorite in which you scored 10 points the entire game.
Yeah.
I think they should be flip flopped, but out of all the matchups, I'm with you. I think that one, it kind of takes the cake for opening weekend.
I think where Buckeye fans would argue with you is their wins over Penn State on the road
Yeah.
and beating Indiana,
Yeah.
another playoff team.
Yep. And
Whereas
Tennessee
Tennessee,
beat Bama.
Tennessee did beat a ranked, with my man Grayson McCall at the time, 24th ranked NC State
That was
team.
a bloodbath.
Yes, and then Oklahoma, who was 15th in a big like 8 o'clock
Yep.
kick game, and then they did beat Alabama.
Yep.
So Tennessee, yeah, I think that would have been fun down there, in Knoxville, but I think it's fine being in Columbus.
Yeah.
Big contest for Nico Iamaleava, and Will Howard.
Ia
Up
Maliava.
Apparently, Will Howard suffered 2 concussions in that game against Michigan. So, who's going to be Ohio State's quarterback? We're talking Georgia. Georgia might be without Carson Beck come theirs. Um, you know,
I'll tell you, Stockton looked great though.
and Oregon looks unstoppable, but Penn State gave them all they could. Boise, we'll see who either gets there, SMU or Penn State. We only got 4 minutes left in this meeting. I don't want this to end without like on a stop. Who do you like for the rest of the way out? How do you think this is going to play out?
Uh, I mean, as of right now, I think Oregon is still going to be able to handle Ohio State and Tennessee. I do think the bye is going to benefit Oregon in that from that standpoint. After Ohio State and Tennessee go out there and beat the crap out of each other for 60 minutes,
Yep.
so I think Oregon's going to get there. I think Georgia has arguably the second best path out of the 4 byes. I think they can get by Notre Dame and Indiana. I think Stockton showed a lot last night for Georgia in that win against Texas and pulling it out in overtime. He came out and he looked honestly better than Carson Beck did when Beck was in there. So I think Georgia's going to be in that Final Four.
And
Um,
that'll be a home game for Georgia. It's the Sugar
it'll
Bowl.
be the Sugar Bowl. I think Texas is going to take down Arizona State. in that 4-5 matchup to go up against Oregon. I love the running back at Arizona State, but
Attaboy.
I just don't think Arizona State's going to be able to run on that Texas defense. I think that's going to be hands down the best defense Arizona State has seen the entire season. And to be completely honest, I mean, if SMU plays the way it did in the fourth quarter against Clemson last night, I think they can give Penn State a game. I'm not saying they can beat them, but I think Penn State is actually going to make that Final Four too, because I think that run defense, because Oregon showed that run defense was not good last night against Penn State, giving up
Mhm.
all those yards to Allen and what's his name, Singletary. I can't remember.
Singleton. Yeah.
Yeah,
Kobe
Singleton.
King puking mid play.
Yep. I mean, but I think it's going to be a tall task for Ashton Genty to beat Penn State. I don't think he's going to be running for 150, 200 yards in that game. He's going to have to earn every single yard he gets in that game, because that's a really good Penn State team. And then when it comes down to the final, just looking at it right now, I think it's going to be Oregon versus Georgia.
And
I
if a Carson
Kirby,
Necklace Georgia team
I
against
mean,
Oregon.
Kirby Smart's going to have those boys ready,
Yep.
and they want redemption. They want redemption from last year.
Yep. Not getting in,
Yep.
losing by field goal to Alabama, getting all the way down. But I do actually like, now that we're talking through this, I like that things will be determined on the field, even though it will be a gauntlet for those teams that played in conference championship games. So this will be better than the BCS system, in the fact that, like, people won't complain that things weren't determined on the field. You can pave your own way. And even with 4 teams, you might have a team that's deserved that's being left out. So at least we're going to get this one experiment this year. And then, if it expands even further, like, I don't know, then we're talking the downstream effects into the regular season, into the conference championship game than we already have. So got 30 seconds before we sign off here. Anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to hear your picks. That's it.
Oh, I think you're down. I don't think we have enough time to get all the way down to the end, but I think that's pretty spot on. I think Texas has a shot. I think Oregon has a shot. I think it's like what we're going to talk about in the preseason: Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, and Georgia. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Special edition, breaking down the college football playoff. It's going to be a fun one over this March. Thanks for Sean Saputo for tuning in. Thanks, buddy. And we'll talk later.